These are my predictions in the world of sport this year, and make sure you stick around to the end of the video where I talk about football. In no particular order, let's start with the cricket. And this summer, the Ashes return. I'm going to start with the women's Ashes, and Australian women dominate that. And I think England women, as much as I want them to beat Australia, I think they'll come short. While England men, I think this time last year, Joe Root was captain. They were an absolute shambles in terms of the test match team. But since then, Ben Stokes has come in as captain and really revitalised not just England test match cricket, but the way test match cricket is played across the world. It's really phenomenal just to see the transition from when Joe Root was captain to Ben Stokes now. It's been absolutely incredible. And of course, the T20 side won the World Cup in Australia. So the Australian men, some of which will have been part of that group that played in the World Cup, they'll want to get one over England, in England at the Ashes. I'm sure Brendan McCullum and Ben Stokes will stick to the plan of just going for it against Australia and would rather chase the game if they win the toss. They'll probably try and bat second. England won't go down without a fight, and they may get thrashed in one of the matches. I can easily see that happening, but I can also see them pulling off a miracle chase run, and I think England will be able to draw against Australia. With boxing, surely it is inevitable that Alexander Usyk and Tyson Fury fight each other at least once, and if they do fight, it would be a phenomenal match between the two. Tyson Fury should never have fought Derek Chisora. He was just doing that because it was his mate and it was an easy payday for Chisora, but finally it's looking set to be Usyk v Fury. Alexander Usyk, yes, is nowhere near as bigger as Fury and can't provide as much power, but he is so quick with his feet and with his arms, and he has such intelligent boxing IQ. Arguably the only fighter has more boxing IQ than Usyk is probably Fury, but even so, Usyk can be a really dangerous opponent for Fury. If Usyk manages to get up close to Fury, he can easily cause a lot of damage. But I think because Fury is so intelligent with his boxing IQ, I think he'll be able to keep distance between himself and Usyk. And to be honest, I didn't like the way Fury just took a fight against Chisora, and I love Usyk's story. I think he's a really charismatic character, and he's fighting for not just himself, but for the nation of Ukraine. I do think though that Fury will be too strong for Usyk, and I'm not sure Fury will knock out Usyk. Fury could go for it. He could really go for it against Usyk, similar to when he went for it against Deontay Wilder in the second fight. He put on more weight and he decided to get up close to Wilder, managed to get up close and eventually knock him out. He could do the same against Usyk, but Usyk is a far better fighter with far more boxing IQ. So I don't think Fury is going to risk it and try and get up close. And he doesn't almost need to really, because he is so much bigger and has so much a longer reach. I do predict that Fury will beat Usyk on points, but maybe not be able to knock him out. In terms of where Joshua goes, he's certainly inferior to Usyk. Maybe he could fight Tyson Fury in the future, only because Fury has come out and said that he basically needs boxing in his life. Fury might just want to fight Joshua just because it's another fight that he can do and something for Fury to focus on. I would love to see Joshua fight Wilder. I think that'd be a really entertaining fight, because you've got Joshua, who is the better boxer and has better boxing IQ, but undoubtedly Wilder could knock out Joshua in one punch. So that would be really entertaining. I'd love to see that fight happen. As for Leon Edwards, it was a real standout moment in the UFC last year for me. The way he was able to knock out Kamaru Usman with that one kick was absolutely incredible. I was so happy for him, and it was actually almost quite emotional watching his post-match interview and watching his reaction to receiving the belt. It was unbelievable. The journey that he's been on, the sacrifices that he's made, I was so happy when he beat Kamaru Usman. Having said that though, Usman no doubt is a phenomenal fighter, and he'll certainly learn from his mistakes last time round, so I can definitely see those two fighting again. And if that's the case, Edwards have to do so much and have to be really on it in order to beat Usman, and I'm not sure that would be the case. I think Usman will just learn from his mistakes, not take Edwards lightly, and make sure he gets the job done. I said I would talk about football at the end, but I can't not mention early on the Women's World Cup that will take place in Australia and New Zealand this year. And going into this major tournament, you'd have to say England are favourites. Yes, they're not #1 ranked team in the world, but all the teams above them, they beat Sweden in the semi-finals, I believe. They beat Germany in the final, and they recently beat USA in a friendly. So all the teams that are above them, they've already beaten. And why can't we say, and proudly, confidently say, that England should be favourites going into this tournament? We should be confident that we're able to beat any other competition. The only team I'd be worried about is USA, but aside from that, I genuinely think England could comfortably beat any team and go on to win the World Cup. And what I mean, the Euros was amazing, but imagine they win the World Cup. And I do genuinely think they will win the World Cup. I just don't see any reason why not, unless maybe you reach USA in the final and they just play really well on the day. But other than that, I really genuinely think England will win the World Cup this year. So with Formula One, it was a bit of a shambolic season for Mercedes last year, wasn't it? Lewis Hamilton really struggling with his car, Russell the same. It was a kind of season of transition and unsettlement, which really meant that Verstappen and Red Bull could just comfortably, relatively comfortably anyway, win the F1 championship. Verstappen completely dominated that season, and unless something really drastically happens with Mercedes, I think that will stay the same. I do see an improvement with Russell, and I think Mercedes at some point will surely be able to fix and sort out their car. I just think Verstappen is such a brilliant driver. He'll be too dominant this upcoming season, and Red Bull just have things really switched on. I can just see them comfortably win, not just Verstappen winning the championship, but Red Bull winning the Constructors' Championship as well. So Djokovic is back in Australia, competing in the Australian Open, and I definitely see him winning that. In terms of the other major tournaments, the Grand Slams, I think Djokovic will win a couple of them, maybe the US Open if he's allowed back in. Certainly I can see him winning the French Open, but then actually you got Alcaraz, who last year won his first Grand Slam, which was the US Open. To be fair, you could see a Djokovic-Alcaraz final in the French Open, which would be so entertaining. And I envision Alcaraz winning one of the 4 Grand Slams. I don't know which one. I said Djokovic could win the French Open. I guess that's probably the most likely for Alcaraz to win, given that Alcaraz is more dominant on clay than he is on grass. But last year was a good learning curve for Alcaraz to learn how to really compete on the grass court in a major Grand Slam, that is Wimbledon. So I think Alcaraz will do really well this year and win 1 Grand Slam. But I think overall Djokovic will dominate the sport. And maybe it's not out the realms of possibility that he could even win all 4 and get a calendar Grand Slam. I don't think that will happen though. My final prediction is I think Djokovic will win 3 Grand Slams, but Alcaraz will win the French Open. The Six Nations was brilliant last year, with France clinching the Grand Slam. 5 wins for them. Final one being against England in France. Fantastic for them. And also you had Italy finally winning in the Six Nations, beating Wales of all teams, which was fantastic to see. And for France, really, it was their moment to shine. We all knew that for the last few years now, they've got a really young team, promising team, and they really filled their potential last year. And I think they'll do the same again this year. I can see France winning the Six Nations. They might not win all 5 matches, but I think they will win the Six Nations and come first. You have Burnley and Sheffield United really standing out in the championship already. It's still relatively early on in the season, but I think Burnley are over 10 points clear of 3rd place, and Sheffield United look really comfortable in 2nd. So I think both those 2 teams will get promoted to the Premier League. In terms of the playoffs though, it is so tight and compact. I think Blackburn Rovers will reach there because they are 3rd and the most likely to reach the playoffs for now. And I know these 2 teams haven't done very well this season with Norwich and Watford. Both these teams have already sacked their managers, but given how bad both these teams have been, they're both still within the playoff shout. I think Norwich are just outside and Watford are actually just about in the playoffs. David Wagner, of course, comes in at Norwich and he has previous experience of getting a team out of the Championship into the Premier League with Huddersfield in 2017. As a Reading fan, I know that because, of course, Huddersfield beat Reading in the playoff final on penalties. But David Wagner is a good manager and I think his level is either at top-end Championship level or just slightly above that. So I think he will do well at Norwich and they will finish in the playoffs. With Watford, the key for them is can they keep João Pedro fit? He is a phenomenal player. I think the best player in the Championship by a long way, and Ismail Sarr is also fantastic for Watford. If Watford can keep those 2 players fit, they will reach in the playoffs with Slaven Bilic, who I think is a level above the Championship. So the final spot in the playoffs, who would it go to? It's so tight, really hard to call, but maybe it could be Millwall. After consistently performing excellently despite their low budget, this could be the season where they finally reach the playoffs. Onto the Premier League now, and yes, Arsenal are top of the table, and on Christmas Day they were 7 points clear of Man City, but I think Man City will eventually overtake Arsenal. Man City still have to play Arsenal twice, which is really important, and Arsenal still have to play Tottenham in the North London derby. I think Man City as well, with their experience of winning the Premier League so many times in recent years, I think that will really help them get over the line. But what an unbelievable job Mikel Arteta has done. Arguably, I think he is manager of the year so far. Last season, they just missed out on the top 4, with a really young squad, and a lot of people were predicting, including me, that they would fall off because the young players just wouldn't be able to deal with the narrow loss of that Champions League spot. But they've reacted to it so well. They play beautiful football. They've only dropped points once at home this season, I believe, and that was against Newcastle recently, where they drew 0-0. I believe they've only lost once this season, and that was against Man United at Old Trafford. So just a phenomenal season from them. Yes, their fans will be bitterly disappointed if they don't win the league, but they've still had a great season. For the relegated teams, I do think Saints will go down just because they're looking really bad at the moment. They've just hired Nathan Jones, but he hasn't had the impact he would have liked. And it does seem from some of the sources online on Twitter that the players aren't really buying into his ideas or what he wants. Orsic is a good signing, but how many more signings are they going to get? Is it going to be enough to keep them up? I don't think so. Bournemouth had an incredible start to the season after they sacked Scott Parker, because it was so early on in the season they sacked Scott Parker. Gary O'Neill is now in charge. They've done so well to avoid being in the relegation zone for so long. I just think going into the second half of the season, they're not going to be able to deal with teams around them who will probably add players in January. I don't see Bournemouth adding a lot of players in January, so I do think they will drop into the relegation zone and fall short. The last team to predict who will be relegated is quite hard. You've got a lot of teams down there. It's really clustered, but I'm going to go with Wolves. Julian Lopetegui is a phenomenal manager, and only in the Premier League could a team like Wolves, who are in the relegation zone, hire such a high caliber manager in Julian Lopetegui. And they signed Mateus Cunha from Atletico Madrid on loan as well. Just ridiculous. And that's what I'm saying about Bournemouth. Bournemouth couldn't make those signings. Wolves can. But despite that for Wolves, they're just not scoring any goals whatsoever. I think Jose Sarr is bailing them out in a lot of games, and Nottingham Forest seem to have found a bit of form under Steve Cooper. They've decided to back him, and it seems to be really working. So it's very tight down there at the bottom, and it's very hard to score, but I don't think Wolves will stay up. I will say though as well that Everton are an absolute shambles. They could or could not sack Frank Lampard, but it won't really make too much of a difference because their squad is not good at all. And having Dominic Calvert-Lewin out injured is a massive blow for them. It really could go down to the wire between Wolves and Everton, but I'm going to say Wolves just. Then last but certainly not least, predicting the Champions League is always very difficult. I don't see a Premier League team going close this year because Man City will be focused on trying to win the Premier League, and Chelsea just look really unorganised at the moment. I don't think they'll do it. And then you got Spurs, who look really lethargic under Antonio Conte, who keep performing badly in the first half but then recovering in the second half. Against top European teams in the Champions League, that won't cut it. So Spurs, I think, will go out relatively soon, early this year. So in terms of who will win it, of course Barcelona aren't in the Champions League. That kind of just leaves basically Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, maybe PSG finally, but Real Madrid have the Ballon d'Or winner in Karim Benzema. Their squad is ridiculous. They've got Champions League winners throughout their team. I think they'll do it again this year. So those are my sports predictions this year. I know I am Football Will, and the majority of my content on this channel for now will be about football, but I am a sports enthusiast and I love to watch different types of sports, and I'm always learning about these new sports. So for example, like I said earlier, boxing and UFC is just something I've recently got into, and similar with F1. So any information about sports I would really appreciate in the comments below, just to build up a small community and dialogue between us, and let me know what videos you want me to make in the future. I would really appreciate that. Thank you very much.